Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's special live stream show where we're going to finally focus on a different case. And we do have two very special guests today, the great guests, hey, Mona and Jo Potuto, law professor. Thanks for being here.
Well, my pleasure.
Sure. Well, Mona, would you graciously like to give us a synopsis of this whole case?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So the Monica Sementilli trial, it started January 29th, 2025 and went on for when did it? I don't even know when it ended. It's not too long ago, but it was 44 days.
Did she freeze?
I think you're frozen. Say something. Okay, now it's working. Sorry.
So the reason I was interested in this trial is I had read about it in a local paper on January 23rd, 2017. And I turned to my husband. We were like a stabbing in this really nice neighborhood. And I'm like, Marty, my husband, isn't that where so-and-so and so-and-so live in this really exclusive neighborhood in the valley? And he's like, yeah. And then I was watching a channel I like, Trial TV Live, who's like they do live streams and a nice chat. And it had this trial on, and I'm like, oh, right, I remember that. So I started watching, and it went on and on and on. And then there are two co-conspirators. So this man, Fabio Sementilli, was stabbed to death in a hard way, if I'm allowed to say those words on YouTube. He was knifed in his backyard by two men that Monica was accused and then found guilty of conspiring to make this happen and giving them the timeline for when he'd be alone in the yard. And the families are split, but it was originally Monica and her lover, who the best part was she was having an affair for over a year with her racquetball coach, who is a sexual offender registered for messing around with a 14-year-old. And he did go to prison for that. And then he was a porn star. And then this racquetball coach that in the valley somewhere. And he was the one that actually did the knife, and he was arrested with Monica, and they were going to have a dual trial, and both of their lawyers were fighting against this for years, which is why it dragged out so long. And finally Robert Baker pleaded no contest, Prof. Joe, when you're saying I'm guilty but I'm not saying it.
Yeah.
And then he was sentenced to LWOP plus maybe 25 for special circumstances. And they finally found the third person after he had pleaded. And then Monica had her alone trial because that guy made a deal for second degree. And both Robert Baker and Christopher Austin, the ones who did the deed, testified in the trial, one for defense and one for prosecution, which made it even more interesting. So I guess that's a pretty concise explanation.
Yeah, thank you. And it sounds like people loved Fabio. He was like a really popular, upstanding celebrity hairstylist. So I didn't hear people criticize him.
He had a winning personality. There was no complaint about him by any human that knew or worked with him, both in Canada and Los Angeles, where they're originally from, which is one of those parallels, Judy, with the family in Canada, and the families are split in decisions, and they don't like each other and talk to each other, etc. And he was like a hairstylist with his sister, and they did like these hair Olympics, which I wasn't familiar with before, where you're doing all this quick color and cut on stage in like a speed.
Oh,
And
that
he,
sounds exciting.
I know, it's so hair Olympics. And then he was hired by Wella to be their representative, like for all over the United States, and they moved him to California. And they only lived here, I think, 2007 or 2010, and then his life was snuffed out. It's very sad. And his sister was there for 3 months supporting this cause in the gallery where hardly any people were. Very easy to get into that trial.
Just wondering, why do you think it took so long for Monica to go to trial? Because wasn't she arrested within a year after the murder?
Oh, it was like 5 months, but she and
Oh,
Baker were going to be tried together. She has these heavy power defense attorneys, two different offices. Blair Burke is one, and Levine, I can't recall his name, right, his first name right now. It might be Leonard. They're like big gun defense attorneys. Baker was only represented by, state assigned, and her attorneys did not want her to go to a dual trial. That's what I think took at least 5 years of hearings and fighting.
And of course, there was COVID over that time too, when nothing was going on, right?
Nobody seemed to talk about that, but of course that, froze the world for a year or
Yeah.
two. That was tough. So that probably did have something to do with it.
yeah. And Professor Potuto, what were your thoughts about the case in general?
You know, I increasingly am astonished at these seemingly or maybe really happy marriages that when they go south for reasons, this one I thought was inexplicable, frankly, why she decided she was tired of him, that it seems to be this constant, I just can't get a divorce because I want the money too. So let's find a way to kill him. And what absolutely floors me is this is someone that you apparently loved, you lived with, you interacted with, you went on vacations with, you had children with. For a period of time, she evidently was very close to his family because I saw something where his sister said she was a great aunt. We all loved her. I mean, all of that. And then, it all comes crumbling down, and it's just impossible for me to explain, frankly. I just have no explanation for it. So that was part of my reaction to this. Um, Another reaction that I had, well, there are a couple. One, that Robert Baker, for seemingly no apparent reason, after all those years fighting and being ready to go to trial, decided to just plead out, and then decide to be willing to testify that she had nothing to do with it. That also surprises me. And maybe that's unfair because someone with his background, I wouldn't picture as being, the sort of the Sir Galahad who's going to take it all on himself. And then the third part was the accomplice,
Christopher Austin.
Christopher Austin.
Chris.
He was a probation parole officer, had known Robert Baker apparently most of his life. I watched the police interview of him, and I watched some, not all of it, but some of his testimony in court. And he seemed, for all I could tell, to be genuinely feeling guilty about participating in this thing. And when he was caught, he too, he's arrested and he says, okay, I'm going to talk to you. And he didn't even get a deal. He just said, I will talk to you and I'm going to tell you everything I know. And that also, so the behavior of the two others, not Monica herself, but the other two, just seems to me, that seems not to be something I see, anyone sees every day. So those were kind of my my three reactions. And of course, it's just another tragedy. A father and a family man, and he's gone because somebody decides she found somebody she wants, likes better, and wants the insurance money too. That's incredible.
And
They had a Bonnie and Clyde, like, passionate, weird love affair where there's letters and recordings of them, and they even put them in holding cells and recorded them. They arrested them in the car as a ruse that they were driving a vehicle that was stolen, and recorded them. And Monica kept writing to him in jail once she knew it was his DNA, which sunk her. But I was there in court to watch both Christopher and Austin and Robert Baker's testimonies. And you're correct, Prof. Joe. He did seem genuine. He was crying. And of course, I'm watching them bring them in and out so you can see other parts of their demeanor.
Yeah.
So is it true that Chris is going to get 16 years in prison for cooperating?
His sentencing isn't until Tuesday, and I read that Judge Cohen is a tough sentencer, so I think that would be the least he could get according to the second degree, but who knows with him,
Well, he testified, and he told the police that he also used the knife, and I think used the knife at Sementilli in his neck. So,
right, he didn't have to say that,
right,
because
right.
Baker said he was the lookout and didn't give his name up, and also told multiple different stories, and also wrote a letter to Monica once he confessed that was ridiculous and didn't make any sense either. So it was, and they were on so long. This trial just dragged on so long. And as I said before, the judge, they would start late, they wouldn't show any hearings, they ended early every day. So it just went on, and there were detectives there and all the lawyers and the family out of town running out of money to stay there on both sides. Monica's sister and mother and brother-in-law were there a lot, and they were on opposite sides.
You know what the background is of the judge, what the judge did before he went on the bench?
I had looked it up at one point, but he's been a judge for a very, very long time, and I don't know if he was a prosecutor or a
Yeah.
private attorney.
Well, my small sample, because I didn't do many trials, I took a sabbatical from teaching and did some, but I didn't do a lot. But my small sampling from my experience and the experience in the office was that former prosecutors ran a pretty crisp court, and things proceeded ahead and they stayed on schedule. And at least a couple of the former defense lawyers were, much more, we'll take it as it comes. Now, my sample is so small, it shouldn't reflect anything. I will say that when I was doing the trials, I hated trials where there were delays, where the judge started late, where he or she didn't work on Friday, where we'd end at 4 or 3:30 or take a long lunch. I absolutely hated it. In part because I like things to go, in part you're trying to run witnesses through, and you can't tell them, you can't give them any really firm idea whether it's going to be today or tomorrow. And in part because when you get ready for trial, you want to do the trial. And I just really hated the ones that worked apparently the way this judge did this time.
He was always on time because I would go early, but the way they keep the jury in this courthouse is completely bizarre. They wait in the hallway. There is no juror room. They go in the same elevators and wait in the same hallways as spectators and both defense attorneys and prosecutors, which is bizarre. And they just wait there.
Okay.
That's horrible. You would think Los Angeles would have the budget to have a nice room.
I was wondering where they were going to go when they finally deliberate.
Yeah.
It was this place where they still had to wait in the hallway, walk through, and then go in the back through the spectators. So if you're sitting in the bench in the second row, you have to stand up for the jury to come in and smash yourself in a different area. It's so, yeah, I'll call myself the 19th juror because I sat right next to the 18 jurors to just try to figure out what they were thinking, but they were stone-faced. They were quite good.
Wow. What did the jury look like?
There were 2 females. By the end, they only had 2 alternates. They had young people, old people, white people, African American people, a Middle Eastern person, a couple of Hispanic people, and one of Levine's cronies that he put on the stand was so offensive to minorities. And actually, it was his cronies were misogynistic, so I guess only 2 women. But there was one of their defense witnesses that was extremely insulting to just about every minority. So I don't think
When
that.
what do you mean crony? The attorney's crony?
He put this divorce attorney on that I would not be surprised if he did several divorces for this man where they've known each other forever. These are older people that think they're all that, these LA people, like they're very taken with themselves and very testosterone and a little old fashioned, in my opinion, as I observed it. It was a little insulting. Oh, my father, Allison, because I live in Santa Monica, so I just drove downtown to go there because the video and the audio was so bad. I'm like, I have to see what's going on here. What is happening in the courtroom?
Did you have to pay for parking every time?
Yes, and it's a big hassle to get there. You have to go on at least 3 freeways, and the least you're gonna pay is like $18, and you have to walk a few blocks. But I used to work downtown, so at first I had my husband drive me because I didn't feel like it, and he looked at me because we had to get up at some ungodly hour to get there by the time I wanted to because of traffic too. And he just looked at me and he went, "This proves how much I love you."
Of course. Yeah.
Pretty funny.
How many days did you go?
I have notes, but I can't even remember. And I forgot my notebook sometimes, but I think Marty was there with me 3 or 4 or 5, or I don't know, maybe up to 10 or 12. It was such a long drawn out thing. And I kept saying, I'm not going back there. And then something would happen where I just went, I want to see this witness. Or I did feel that the jury was going to come back the morning I drove down, and the verdict did arrive. So that was fortuitous to be there for that, and very bizarre. I don't even know what it's like for the 2 of you to see judgments come down, but that was the first I'd ever seen, and it stuck with me mentally and psychologically and spiritually for a while, just kind of digesting it. No matter what you think, these are humans, and it's a very bizarre system. And is there justice? There's punishment, but you can't bring somebody back to life, and somebody else wasted their lives, and it's horrible. And the families are all disjointed and not speaking. And when I went for the verdict, I thought it was a juror question because I did speak to Fabio's family. I knew people there because there aren't that many people there. So you talk to them, and Morella told me it was a question when the verdict came in. So I'm like, oh, it's a question. And then all these deputies showed up, Prof. Joe. It was so I'm like, what's happening here? And it's a little courtroom. And first there's 2 extra ones, and there's always 2 or 3. And then there's 3, 4, or 5 more. and they split the aisles of the two, our family.
Families.
Yeah, it was, they actually guarded them, and the prosecutor let the Sementilli family out first. And of course, the jurors went out first, and I was hesitant to speak to any of them because I don't want to get in any lawful trouble. But they were just standing in the hallway chatting with the prosecution and one other trial watcher. But I just was being respectful and not pushy. I'm still looking for a juror interview, and there aren't any, which we always want to see, but it's always a terrible idea legally, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Only potential bad could come of it. Even when Mentor Lawyer had that interview with the juror from the previous Magdanua trial, people were totally ragging on her too. So it was kind of good that she didn't show her face. So,
I always feel like it could be an appellate situation. Is that, do you agree with me on that? Like if a juror speaks right away about what they deliberated about?
Well, it's not appellate in that sense, but if, let's say, a juror, and in fact, to some extent, you could say that happened in I like to forget the name of that trial in Massachusetts.
Lori, oh, I thought it was the Lori Vallow was
No, it's the police officer who died on the lawn, and they're prosecuting her.
Karen Reed.
Yeah, I try to forget the name of that case. There, some of the jurors talked after, and there was an issue that had to be resolved by the trial judge, and that could have been appealed, and I think it has been appealed. So a juror could say something such as, we went out to the scene and looked at it, or one of the jurors told me that he knew all about this case before because he watched all the earlier publicities, things like that, that would go to either the jury following the directives and whether that could have had an impact on the result because now they're looking at evidence that wasn't part of the record, or whether it goes to juror bias. And those sorts of things obviously are relevant because you have to have an objective jury. So it's not quite an opinion. It doesn't affect, it's not an appealable issue with regard to the decision that was decided in the case. It's extraneous to that, but it will become an appealable issue and can result in a reversal of the conviction.
Yeah, it's terrible when that
Yeah.
happens. We don't need to know they knew other things. They shouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, getting to the comments, Allison wants to know, why did Chris Austin allow himself to be talked into this?
That was
Anybody want to guess?
I pondered about that so much, and to me, because Baker and Austin's father, and I think close to your neck of the woods, Judy, is where they were from.
Yeah, he said Fayetteville,
Were
North
best
Carolina.
friends.
Uh-huh.
And this guy, was a predator too of young people, and I don't know what he exposed Chris to or what he might have on his father, but it's why it makes no sense, but he did it. So I was just like trying to remind myself, this man did this. Don't feel sorry for him. It was, for whatever reason, what a terrible choice.
I've tried to guess also because I started with the police interview of Austin before I looked at, I'd seen some of the trial, but before I looked at anything else. And it was so hard to understand because he talked about not wanting to do it. He talked about he's not a good person because of the killing, and that Robert Baker said, "You're still a good person." He said, "No, I'm not." He backed out once in some ways, trying not to do it. So it was pretty hard to figure it out. The only thing I could figure out, because he called Baker Uncle Robert.
Unc.
Okay. The only thing I could figure out was that they had a close relationship. It wasn't clear to me, and hey, Mona, you may know more about this, because it wasn't clear to me whether he knew when he came down that it was going to be a killing as compared to scaring Fabio. And there was also some information that he was told that Monica was being abused, and so it was going to be to save her from the situation. But saying all that, it's still to me not an adequate explanation at all for being willing to take a knife and knife somebody you don't know in the neck. I mean, there's just no explanation that covers it when he seems to be genuinely remorseful afterward and didn't seem to want to participate at the front end.
Was he promised money?
Yes. Well, not a specific amount, but it's like, I'm going to take care of you. And he was given these mystery gold coins. That's another part of the huge amount of evidence against Monica, a safe being open and Fabio being a collector. And Austin, when he was finally caught, which wasn't until last year in 2024, he gave the prosecution information after that initial interview that, I don't know if you saw the second one or the first one where it's like, I want a lawyer. It's probably when the prosecutor came up, who was fabulous, two fabulous female prosecutors, Heather Stagel and Beth Silverman. And it was Beth Silverman's case from the get-go before Monica was even arrested. And they all partied in Vegas, Prof. Joe, like these characters that were included other people. And I'm not sure what Chris was exposed to. It seemed more like he thought he was like the chauffeur, and there were all these, sexy women and things going on, and maybe benefits for him, like being part of it, but not really paying attention, like a good chauffeur to a little lascivious group. That's what it seemed like. I don't think he really knew, but definitely he and Baker and this guy Birdsong that never made an appearance, that one of the detectives think should be arrested too. They definitely spoke about what was going to happen the summer before this happened. So he did know that it was a plan, that there was a knife involved, and that he was going to be part of it. So it gets all sketchy. But he also gave them information about an attempt to do this the night before that Baker never told, that they were able to prove some things that did help on the mountain of evidence. So, and the other thing that was fascinating about this trial that I've never seen before, there were no time limits on openings or closings or anything, that nothing was buttoned up, a lot of repetition. The opening went over 2 days.
Wow.
And the closing went over 2 days.
When you're trying to do a roadmap for a group of people who do not know the story, 2 days is not a good roadmap.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you have to hit the highlights, not the. You got to.
When I could break it down on my own time, I thought it was quite brilliant. But the other part of that courtroom, that actual courtroom, the air is bad, the vents are bad. And part of the reason the judge might have ended early is I think he can tell when the jury just cannot pay attention, because I called it sleep dust was coming in, because when I would go there, I'm like, is it like next week? And they'd end early, and it felt like you were there for a month in a day.
I did think the opening, although it was, I think, too long, was really effective. And some of the things she said, I just thought were just extraordinary and really, I thought, very, very impactful. I mean, I remember her saying at one point, you know, if you believe Robert Baker's story that she wasn't involved and she's not convicted, she's going to go out of here and check and cash that insurance check of Fabio's and spend that money. And I thought, you know, that's true, and she's entitled to say it, but and it shouldn't be something. I mean, the jury shouldn't convict someone because they don't like her and she's going to get insurance money. But I thought it was such a strong way of, you know, of couching the case. I also thought, Judy, I wondered for a while, particularly when I was listening to Austin, why Baker needed somebody else. And he had him come from Oregon, didn't he? He took a flight down to do it.
Washington at the time.
Washington.
Or Alaska. No, it was Alaska originally.
Was it Alaska by that point? That's right, because I remember him talking about it. And it may be if you're going to use a knife, you need two people. But then I thought, since they evidently thought they were going to try to maybe disguise this as the two people who at that point when hoodies were doing home invasions and everything, that they thought they were going to make it look like that. And if that's what you're going to try to do, you need two people if you think you're going to be seen. But if that's what they were trying to do, they did a really terrible job. They didn't even take the expensive watch. I mean, I don't want people to go commit crime, but I do think if you're going to commit a crime, you might just sit down and make a little schematic of what needs to be done and when and where the holes are. These people seem to just jump in the deep part of the pool and figure they're going to be able to swim to one side or the other and it'll just be fine. And they talk. I mean, Judy, you have talked about where the parallels were with the Adelsons. I mean, you put them in a car together and there they are chatting and incriminating themselves. She did more, I think, to nail this conviction against her than anybody else did. You know, she had these comments about, gee, I think maybe they'll know something. Maybe they know about the plan. It was amazing what she's sitting in the police car and is willing to make incriminating statements. It's extraordinary. Maybe, you know, I guess I'm going to find a silver lining in all this. Maybe the kind of people who gravitate towards this sort of, this is our solution, are the kind of people who just don't think clearly in everyday life, you know? And so
That's true.
They don't think clearly in terms of this is the thing to do. And of course they don't think clearly and they get caught. But, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering, because I definitely don't know the case as well as Mona here, but why do you think it took so long to catch Chris? Was it because he had no DNA? Huh?
It's because they had multiple suspects, and over the years, different sets of detectives retired. And it took this detective, Mitzi Roberts, who is retired, among many of the detectives, including the original detective, actually took his own life in 2019. And then his partner retired, and then other detectives took over, and then other did. So there's a huge amount of data. There are so many legal documents to fill out to get information of flight information and bank information. And then you have to start over and over if you don't get honed in on exactly what you want. But this detective, she figured it out, but then she retired. So it was another detective set that interviewed Austin and arrested him. So that's why it took so long, because of so many changes of detectives and huge amounts of evidence that they had to go through, and years of it. And it was minutia and a very patient detective that put it together with one little bank statement that she went on while she was doing other things. And he also left town right away. It is weird, though, because he got a traffic ticket in the rental car that day. So I can't figure out for the life of me why they couldn't put that piece together, since it was the car. in the valley on the day. But
yeah, that's just like another similarity with Lewis and Sigfredo getting a speeding ticket.
right,
on
and
the
there are 3 different trips and doing all that coke and liquor the whole time and who knows what. I don't understand either, to the point what Prof. Joe said earlier. My dearest friend is a therapist, and when I would ask her, why do people do this or that, she'll go, it's a good thing you can't understand why, because your brain doesn't work that way. So it is a special set of humans that are able to do horrible things and not feel the depth of it. It's amazing. And sad.
But she seemed to be better at, I don't know that I'd call it disguising, but her family, from what I could tell, his family genuinely liked her. His sister seemed genuinely to like her, and and said she was a great aunt and she was fun to be around. And you don't get that picture of Donna Adelson, that she was somebody that people gravitated to, and was just all enveloping and fun and warm and genuine. She seemed to either be able to hide what she was about extraordinarily well, or just flip on a switch and become a different person when she decided she was tired of the marriage and married this guy who, again, I mean, that's another part. She's married to someone who's very successful. She's got a wonderful life, 2 children, anything that she'd want in terms of material things. He apparently adored her. I saw one clip where he'd like to come home from work early so he could dance with her. He seemed to be somebody that everybody liked. And the next thing you know, she's with this person at a racket club that she knows has the history of the sexual claim, and I think knew that that he was an actor in adult movies. And this is the person she moves to.
And had 2 teenage daughters at
Defies
the time.
what? Well, I
And
didn't hear it. So.
she had 2 teenage daughters, which horrified
Yeah,
me, that
yeah.
she let this man in her home and her life.
It's that brain is so far from anything that I can understand. I mean, it's really in a different universe for me. I
Well,
can't.
there's a 3rd child that was Fabio's son from his first marriage.
Right, Luigi, right?
Yes, and Luigi testified. He seemed extremely credible to me. This is like day 6, so 3 months ago. And he discussed being aware of other accusations of Monica being a cheat as a kid, watching their fights a couple of times. And remember, Monica wooed Fabio out of his first marriage. So she definitely seemed like she had a history of wanting to stray, but the duplicitousness of her personality, I think, is what you were talking about. It was incredible when you would just see what people were saying in those family clips and then read those letters and listen to those overhears. It was just, wow.
And I think I think I remember that there was it a clip of the wake? But I remember her looking at her mother, and he was there, and there was something about her mother just making some really dismissive comment. And I remember thinking, her mother knows that she's having this relationship, clearly, because her mother was, as I recall it, and Himona, you correct me, but as I recall it, her mother was not pleased to see him show up at the wake and made it clear that she wasn't pleased.
Correct. And that was part of Monica Sementilli's testimony. And just as a follow through on that, I felt so badly for Monica's mother, who was in the court. Even though they were all supporting her and probably had the evidence that they shouldn't be, that kind of loyalty. But she was not looking like she was going to even make it through the testimonies. And then she sat there for the verdict. It's really sad to see that kind of dishevelment and destruction. And Morella told me it was even more upsetting because their dad, Fabio and Morella, and Loretta is another sister that was there. They lost their dad when they were young, and Fabio was immensely close with Monica's father.
Mm.
And they were super tight, and he loved them so much, which made it even more difficult for the separation of the families.
Well, I imagine, and I hope I never have to encounter it, but I imagine that if it's someone in your family, whether a sibling or a child or a parent who's committed a really heinous crime, that, your defense mechanisms kick in and you just can't believe this person could have done that thing. And it takes a lot of time and sifting through and reflection and getting away from it to be able to get to the point where you're willing to, changing your picture of the world. Paradigm shifts, no matter what they are very hard for us. This has to be extraordinarily difficult for anyone. To be able to see the mother who raised you and drove you to your, hockey, games or, whatever, murdered your father. I mean, that is not something that you can take in one swallow. Even if your relationship with your mother isn't great, it seems to me that would take a long time to be able to process and get to the point where you can accept it. And I expect it would be maybe even harder for a mother of a child who does something like that.
Well, Monica's daughters completely sided with Monica.
Right.
And they have a severed relationship with their aunts and, I don't know if there's any grandparents left on that side. It was such a long trial. And the cousins, it's like super sad. But they were in the court for the verdict too, with friends, and they just sat there like it was any other day. No reaction. Just, it was very odd to me. And I saw them walking down the street when I was downtown outside. They're just strolling on the sidewalk on a beautiful day in LA, like la la with my friend.
But they're probably numb. They were probably rehearsing what they should look like because they knew people would be taking pictures and staring at them.
No one took pictures. No one was there. No media, hardly.
Oh.
I mean, there were media in there, but you can't take pictures in that building. And there wasn't one TV crew or anybody, even though I did recognize somebody from ABC that was there the whole time, clacking away, coughing and sneezing throughout this trial.
Oh. Yeah.
Uh-oh. In that
what
room.
What about one of the daughters posted something on Instagram, and didn't she first say justice was served?
Yes.
Right? So does that make you think like she is starting to think like, well, maybe my mom did do something?
Well, I'm not sure. The older daughter definitely, that was the younger one, and this is the one that found her father a minute after he was, killed, and it's the only one that went to therapy, and it's the one that kept texting to her mom going, when are you going to come home, when she was out partying all the time. And I think it was an odd statement because on one hand, she said, justice has been served and I'm not going to talk about this anymore, and posted a picture of their family at Disneyland as if she felt like that was her family in her mind. She said two things that didn't connect with each other. Justice was served and I had the happiest childhood or the best family, something like that. But who knows how they're going to digest it, and I'd be curious to see what they're going to say at Christopher Austin's hearing on Tuesday, and then their mom's hearing, as victim impact statements. That'll be curious.
It does make you feel sad seeing the picture of them all happy at Disney World or Disneyland. But that's how she wants to remember things, was when she had a happy family. So,
Well,
it's
Judy,
psychologically too hard.
You deal with families that have schisms and find things out and aren't happy with each other. What do they still have a fantasy about what it was, if there are any older children, or if you have to deal with the whole unit?
Well, that's what I don't know, because I just deal with my client directly. So typically the children, or especially adult children, are not involved. So yeah, I don't know how they deal with things. So
I'm trying to think about this. I wonder if you had what you thought was a happy childhood, and you had parents you thought loved you and loved each other, and then you find out at some point that either things have changed dramatically, or worse, that they were never quite the way you thought they were as you were living through them at the time. What would you do then? I think I would still want to cling to the fact that there was a time when we were all happy together, and it burst apart, and I'm going to blame my mother for this happening, but there was still a time when we were all happy, rather than rewrite in my mind the earlier time. For me, I think that would make it even worse to undo what the good times were, what I thought the good times were, because of what came later. I think I'd want to try to hold on to, there was a time when we were all together and happy.
That's sweet and loving. I'm a little rougher than that, where I'm like, wow, I can't believe the things I've hidden from myself just to survive psychologically. But it's, different personalities, as we see. And if you want to talk about how similar, the similarities or differences in the Adelson trial, it's the schism family. It's the in-laws that aren't allowed to see the children, even though it's their nieces. It's, and in this case, a brother, a half brother and two half sisters. Their relationship was severed. And the money, always disregard for human life, thinking if you didn't do the deed, it's not as bad and everybody has to go down anyway. It's amazing, like you were saying earlier, Prof. Joe, that how do people, what is in their minds that they're okay with this? And we're all, and the length of time, the 8 years it took to have everybody convicted, and that's peanuts compared to the Adelsons. They're still, two of them are unindicted at this point.
Yeah, and the one that's indicted is being delayed now until maybe September, if we're lucky.
Mm-hmm.
She'll be institutionalized by then.
Yeah. Well, getting back to what Professor Potuto said about not many people seeming to like Donna, actually, I do recall there was a former employee who talked to me behind the scenes and said that Donna actually did seem pretty nice on the surface, and they treated their employees very well until they didn't like you, of course. And they would always bring lots of gifts and souvenirs for their employees from their vacations. And she said something about how the Adelsons either helped Erica's brother buy a car, or helped him buy a car, gave him money, something like that. So that kind of explains how they do have some loyal friends and employees. So she could be nice when she wanted to be. Yeah. So I think a lot of these people, sort of like Wendi, like, wasn't it Jeremy Mutz who said when he first heard about Dan Markel's murder that his friends sort of knew Wendi and they all told him she was such a nice person. There's no way she could have been involved in this murder. But now, once more info has been released, more and more people started changing their minds.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing from Wendy's former friend that we heard whisperings about her.
Sarah Youssef?
Yes.
Mhm.
I guess.
Well, we're going to, whether it's Donna's trial or Wendy's trial, presumably, if there's anything there, we will know about it. And
Yeah.
I think Robert will be very interesting. He was the witness at Donna's trial I was most interested in hearing from, because he was at the Judy, your memory is going to be better than I am on this, but the 75th, the birthday party for Harvey,
Or
which happened before the murder. Yeah. And he, I think, had some interesting observations, or will have, to share about the dynamics, at that time and what was happening at that party, because I think there's something that I saw somewhere where he intimated that it just seemed like things were off at that party, and then off when he called to try to find out what happened, and to say how sorry he was. So I think he will have some interesting observations. I know that at the hearing, when they were trying to keep some of his testimony out or all of it out, they were saying he's not a witness, he's not an expert. How can he talk about, whether somebody looked guilty or not? And Judge Everett then said, well, he knows the family, and he's going to be able to talk about his interactions and his feelings about how his mother acted or others. So I think his testimony is going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I'm sure he can totally dispel this idea that Donna and Wendi didn't really care that much about Dan's motions and the relocation, because you know how Wendi kept trying to downplay it at every trial, just saying, "Oh, everything was copacetic between us."
So did her lawyer, and I thought, I really did think, Judy, that when they were doing that the file of all the pleadings and all the motions and everything in the divorce, I didn't think a prosecutor would have anything more have to say than just plop that in front of her and say, so this is an amicable divorce.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that 900-page book, that was amazing. I love Georgia plunking that down and Wendi sweating through it, trying to look through the copious amounts of pages. And then Georgia would go, page 542, line 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
So she's.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I think the prosecutors are very prepared to counter these hostile witnesses, knowing exactly what to do or what to point to, because they can predict certain witnesses are going to be combative or try to lie. Yeah. Well, this comment by Nancy Drew, that also kind of sounds like what you could say about this whole Dan Markel case. Because did anyone care about how it would affect the children? They just probably assumed the kids were little, that the kids will be resilient.
I thought, Judy, that Donna, at least, I'm not so sure, I don't know about Wendi because I haven't heard her say enough on the record. I thought Donna at least thought they would be better off with her and living with her than with their father. I mean, I just think that's crazy, but I think she did think about them and came to absolutely the wrong conclusion about it. With this case, I thought one of the really really awful, there's a lot awful about it, but they never moved out of the house after the murder. She had her 16-year-old daughter find her father bleeding knifed at the pool, dead, and they don't move away. And then, she leaves them to go, a weekend with her boyfriend, or is out at night. That's, talk about not being a caring parent. But you can just see with children how absolutely willing they are to make every kind of excuse or have explanation for a parent. That parent-child relationship is really strong, and you really need to feel that you've got parents who are on your side and care about you. And so I think to some extent they're willing to do mental gymnastics to try to do that. I mean, imagine you're the 16-year-old and you find your father dead and knifed, and you don't move away. You just stay there. I mean, awful.
The security system, which was also another thing, another piece of evidence that convicted her. Monica did not replace the system. She denied having access to it. And the man who set the system up testified in court.
Oh, and didn't Monica send an email to Robert with info about that home security system?
Mm-hmm. With the code.
That's just so bizarre. Like, why would you do that? I mean, even with someone you're having an affair with, why would you give them home security info?
And if you were planning to kill him, why wouldn't you write it on a piece of paper and hand it to him as compared to create an electronic trail? Not that I want to help murderers, but I mean,
do it in handwriting. Yeah.
They were on a different app called Viber that is encrypted, and that's what they communicated on burner phones, and they both deleted their apps. So they just thought they weren't going to get caught. It's ridiculous and disgusting, and thank goodness they were too unintelligent so that they could be in prison where they belong, because that kind of problem solving doesn't deserve to be out in public, in my opinion.
Did the investigators find those app messages, or were they totally lost?
They found some, and they had the data of when and how many times they communicated. And then Baker said a computer was stolen or something, and they found his cloud and got downloads of a lot of those sexy pictures Monica was sending, and some of those. They were just not smart. There was data unerased.
I'm what they call a Luddite. Modern electrical stuff is not me, but I know enough to know that just because I don't have it on my phone anymore doesn't mean it isn't floating in wherever that cloud is, and it's still there. And I also know enough to know that what technology can't break into today, they may well be able to break in tomorrow, because everything gets so much more sophisticated. I mean, I thought, you want another parallel. It's Wendi going to the house the day of the murder, in my view, just to be sure it happened, or at least that much. And you have Monica sitting in the parking lot at the Target on her phone, pinging, or whatever the good verb would be, the house. And I know the defense had said at one point, you couldn't see into the house. But what are you doing sitting in a Target, targeting your house right at the time that your husband's being murdered? What conceivable? I heard the defense, I think it was, say, well, people do things, or maybe it was a podcast I heard. People do things like you might be sitting in a parking lot watching, a movie or something that's playing on your TV at home or whatever. I don't know anybody who does that. Maybe you do. I know people who would look at their phone and there's a podcast on it and watch it there. I don't know anybody who's pinging home to get it.
That's a good point, because I was like, wait a minute. I walk on the beach sometimes watching a trial, and people are like, put your phone away. They'll like say that to me.
But you're watching your phone. You're not pinging home to get a stream.
Yeah, let me go to my internet address. and download that information. That is a very good point. I didn't think about how dumb that was. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that were done poorly, but the whole Rob thing that you were talking about before, once he testifies, will we be able to have access to that chambers hearing that they had with him or about him? Like, do they release that information?
I don't think so because it was an in-camera hearing.
Yeah,
right? So
unless
stay
some of that
secret.
is used to impeach, so it comes out because it ends up being relevant and used in the trial, right? And then you would get to hear some of it. And if you hear some of it, then the other side probably has the right to say, well, you're only getting a piece of it, you should hear the whole thing. Although I can't imagine, we're guessing about what was actually talked about. So theoretically, some of it could come depending on what the cross-examination is of him on the stand. But on the other hand, if he's going to say what they didn't want him to say, and that's what they were arguing about in the in-camera hearing, you don't need the in-camera hearing because you're going to hear him say it on the stand. Or get some intimation of what they're not letting him say. If they don't get it in a motion in limine, if they're making an objection at the time, you're going to have a pretty good guess about what it is they don't want him to say on the stand, even if the judge says you're right, he's not going to say it here.
That makes a lot of sense. I don't think in those terms. I'm like, oh, goody, are we going to get to read or hear, or is Judy going to do a reading?
Yeah, and Judy does great readings of these. In fact, I've used the reading she did with Joel Waldman. I've referred to it many times, Judy. Every time the question was, what is the defense going to get out of Wendi this time because they're going to go depose her? I say each time, did you not see Joel Waldman and Judy Singh doing a reenactment of the first time in Katie's trial? And all it was,
I assert.
I assert. Nothing came in. I mean, I think you got in her name.
No.
And it was so why people would think that this time around she's going to do the same thing is extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, in terms of Rob's deposition, I'm pretty sure he did get deposed. So the depositions have typically been released or potentially available after the trials. So I'm not entirely sure how to get them because it was someone behind the scenes who actually emailed me all those deposition transcripts. But, supposedly there's some way you can request them through FOIA, I think, make a request after the whole thing is over. So we'll have to see if I have to pay to get them because a lot of times they will charge you for the time. Yeah.
It's going to be too much. It's not an inordinate amount. And Florida has those pretty relaxed laws about getting a hold of things. Different states have different situations.
Florida does, but a lot of this, what's happened in Donna's trial, there are a lot of things that are under protective order. I guess in an absolute sense, I can't say a lot, but certainly many, given that it's really a completely open record state, and I don't see that in other trials, but there certainly have been some here, and maybe part of it relates to the conflict issue with regard to Daniel Rashbaum, and that's driving some of the protective orders.
Don't get the Donnas started about Danny Rashbaum.
Yeah. So give us a refund. Right.
He's on our to-sue list, right? Right, Donna?
Yeah. He's on the to-sue list now. He has now become a persona non grata. Yeah. But getting to this whole Wendi thing, which is what a lot of people still want to talk about. So during this whole Sementilli case, I was thinking, what overt acts did Monica do that got her convicted? So the first one was, didn't she leave the front door unlocked? so the guys could break in?
She left the front door unlocked. She had this mirror thing that covered the safe open, and the safe open because the security system was pinging her that was open. And then they denied stealing anything out of the safe, and they denied having gold coins in there, and the gold coins were different stories. But those were two things that were testified to multiple times. Everything in that trial was repeated.
Yeah.
You know, shampoo, rinse. It was,
and depending on when you say the conspiracy started, it's the giving the code to the house to Robert would be another overt act.
That totally is an overt act. And even before that, even though Austin didn't remember it, Monica, Austin, and Baker were all in the same place in Vegas, and that was data that was found. And she was there with Fabio on one of his big, like, fancy business trips, which is kind of repulsive. And then when he had to do something, she met with them in this hotel that they have the metadata about. So that conspiracy started at least that long ago. And also Baker texted different friends. I have this girlfriend, I have a girl, she's got money, we're getting married. So that was that, and her going by Monica Baker.
Yeah, but there are two different questions. One is, was there three maybe. One is, was there a conspiracy? Two, when did the conspiracy start? And then the third issue is with regard to Monica, was there an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy? Now, most places, it doesn't have to come from Monica. It can be any conspirator that did an overt act in furtherance of, but there are jurisdictions in which, in order to grab somebody as part of the conspiracy, you've got to show an overt act by that person. And Florida law, Judy, now I don't remember the case I looked at about it, but it was out of that case where it was the mother who walked around Tallahassee for years.
Mike
the alligator.
Williams.
Yeah.
Mike Williams.
There's an appellate case in that with regard to the wife's culpability that talks about the level of involvement that you've got to be able to show in the wife. And I looked at it a year ago, and I remember enough to say there's something in there that responds to what we're talking about. And I don't remember enough to tell you with any degree of certainty what it is.
I did do a live stream about that appellate decision.
Oh, there you are.
Denise Williams. So there, the court said that the prosecution failed to prove what exactly was the act that Denise did in furtherance of the murder. So they overturned the murder conviction on that basis, but she's still in prison, though, because of the conspiracy.
Right. And there's another child who's always believed her mother, and the relationship with the grandmother was,
that's
irrevocably sundered.
Where the only child of the victim just is still siding with Denise.
Right.
So the grandmother is still alive, though. So, and she has been in touch with Ruth Markel. So that's kind of nice to hear. Yeah. But I'm trying to think, what else did Monica do? Because, I mean, it seems like Monica was like a lookout person. Would you say that she was trying to make sure the coast was clear for the two guys?
She told them, didn't they? She was the one who let them know when he was going to be at the house. It's not correct? I mean, so there's another level of involvement. Excuse me, Hemon, you probably know a lot more. But those
tell us more.
I know a lot more, but that was part of her checking her data and Baker having access to the home security system. Where that camera was pointed, or one of them, you could see when her daughters left, when the maid left, when Fabio came back, that he was alone. So that was all part of the conspiracy. And then the mystery, I never had the app all of a sudden right after the killing. That was pretty damning.
But in terms of like more solid evidence, was it mainly because Chris Austin pointed his fingers at her?
I think it was all not hard evidence, and that's why Beth Silverman did such a comprehensive opening and closing to give all the hints and behaviors that didn't match, and that two people gave a timeline, Detective Roberts, and then this guy that has some kind of security system that I was like, wow, that how could they? I never thought she was going to get off. I thought it was a possibility of having a hung jury, but never did I think she was going to not be, that she was going to be exonerated. It just didn't look good for her. And, it's going to be interesting to see her sentencing. I'm very curious about who will show up. I wonder if maybe one of her daughters has had enough and won't be there, because this is the other thing I was thinking about that I always suspected with the Adelsons that people don't really talk about. Monica's daughters are lumped together as the daughters. Dan's children are lumped together as the boys. As a parent of two very different young men now, I would think one would be of one mind and one would be of another, and they probably argue about it in private. I don't think it just goes as a group, a sibling group.
Or it affects their relationship. There was a murder here in New Jersey many years ago. They made a movie out of it. And it was three sons, and the husband had the wife killed, and it was a murder on the Turnpike, which is a toll road here. And two of the sons believed that their father had nothing to do with it. And the third thought he was innocent. And it had a dramatically negative impact on the relationship of the three brothers, at least for many years. I don't know whether if they've repaired it now, but certainly for a long time, that's the way it was. Trying to think who wrote a book about it, and then there was a movie made of it. And in fact, and I'm blanking on the actress's name and the TV series, but there was a young actress on a TV series who was in that. The mother on the TV series was in that movie playing the mother. The young actress visited the set and met one of the brothers, and they got married.
What?
So, yeah.
Oh, when you remember
but
that.
I can't tell you the name of the series. And I'm blanking. It might have been McGinnis who wrote the book. I don't want to swear to it, but it might have been McGinnis who wrote the book. And the mother, I can tell you she was tall and thin with blonde hair and was in a sitcom. But that's about as far as I'm going to be able to go with it.
Right.
Is it Joanna?
Was it the woman? There you go. Jen states that it was a woman from Growing Pains.
Joanna Kearns.
Joanna Kearns, and the daughter in Growing Pains went to the set when the movie was being made, met one of the brothers, and they ended up getting married. And look at this. Jen State, Wonderful. Blind. If it's blind fate, then it is McGinnis.
Chats are the best. They're the best.
That's
wow. Right. Okay. Well, that's amazing. Yeah, I haven't heard of that before.
But I think you should at least be pleased that I remembered this much about it, not expecting to talk about it at all.
I'm all in. I'm super curious about that case. In the lulls when there's no active trials, we go back and revisit other ones.
Yeah.
I do. I'll speak for myself.
Sometimes there are all sorts of weird similarities with the way people behave or how they got caught. So, what about this? Doesn't it sound pretty wacky? Her excuse of why Baker's blood was there.
Yes.
That was so poorly done. And in the overhears, Monica would have a strong voice and a whisper voice. But when you went to court in the courtroom, they had the transcript up with the overhears so you could understand all the words. And they're like, oh, how could she be with this man if she didn't have anything to do with it? Once she knew it was his DNA in the car and the house, she came up with this ridiculous story that she bashed him in the hand and he bled profusely at the racquetball court that day, and took the bloody towel and dripped it all over the house. And she's like, remember? And he's like, yeah, remember my injury? Because they caught a little Band-Aid on the finger that he cut his, it was just so, it seemed to me almost like an evil middle school plot, how they spoke to each other and how madly they were in love and how they thought they were going to get away with these ridiculous explanations.
Yeah.
Well, if you have blood of the main suspect in your house, you're going to have a ridiculous explanation for trying to come up with a non-incriminatory reason.
Right. And her older daughter had seen him sleeping there once a couple months or a month before Fabio was killed, when he had a sleepover.
Yeah. And that sounded ridiculous too. What she told her daughter, that, oh, he just slept over because he got drunk. But, didn't she claim her female friend had also stayed over?
Yeah, allegedly there was I didn't even know racquetball was still a thing until this trial. I remember it from maybe the late 70s or early 80s. I'm like, what's with all this racquetball club people and drama? It's almost, they had some very humorous witnesses that were from the group both, and they used one on the defense and one in the prosecution. And it's like, oh yeah, we found out, did you know they were having an affair? No, but they also were swingers, and there was a couple that was aware that they were seeing each other who used to double date with them. And once Fabio was killed, they didn't want to have anything to do with them for a while, but then they weren't arrested, so they still partied with them and went to Vegas with them and went to dinners and stuff like that. And Monica was crying poor, and Wella was, man, I wish I worked for that company. They helped her so much, paid for the wake, paid for these vacations, paid her Fabio's full salary for 6 months.
That's nice.
And they were all from different parts of Europe and the United States, and they were so well spoken, and they all she asked about the insurance, the first night when we were all there commiserating with her. That's not a good look. Probably, right, Prof. Joe, we don't want to help criminals, but maybe people shouldn't go, hey, can I get the insurance? Like, what do I have to do? Maybe wait a month or two.
Yeah, that's right.
Or at least a week.
Right. Or an hour, right?
Yeah, because wasn't Wendi also trying to ask about insurance and, trying to figure out what money she was entitled to?
And Lori Valdo was calling right away to find out about her husband's insurance. And there's a tape of her being just appalled that he had changed the beneficiary to his sister, and she didn't know
Oh.
about it. Yeah. So yeah.
Oh,
And Chud the Storm Daybell calling, or Dubbell, whatever he said his name was, calling to see how much it was going to cost to cremate Charles. They had
Yeah.
that recording too. There's so many horrors, and I can't believe we're in the human race with these people. They must not be from this humanity. It's insane. Oh, that right, certified fraud examiner. That was amazing. And Anna stayed in court. Monica's sister was shown all these pictures of Monica doing
naked and gross.
just naked, doing things to herself in her parents' house while she was claiming she was distressed straight out of one of the funerals for Fabio in Canada. And she was like, she says to the judge, do I have to look at it? And he's like, yeah. And the prosecutor kept showing her, is this in your parents' house? And they would make an explanation of what Monica was, and is this, and is this. And if you're sitting in the court, you can see the pictures with the fuzzed out part.
So what did you see? What did you get to see?
You know, what I saw were things like that. We're seeing how the court is run very similar to any office, where they're all jovial in the morning because it's their job. The judge would hang out with the clerk at her desk while you're waiting for court to start, not out of his robe, laughing and joking, and people passing out treats and candy and things like that. And that was kind of remarkable to me. But then it makes sense that everybody needs that water cooler moment, and me knowing that we used to laugh in the ER just to make ourselves sane in sad situations. It helps me to laugh at things. And also, I'm not squeamish at all, and I love all the ME stuff, and I love all, just show me the blood and the guts, and I'll be intrigued and try to make a story in my head. But when they showed Fabio right after he was killed on the screens there, I got like so overwhelmed and sad, because not so much the knife stuff, but all of his clothes were like hyped up, and I just felt like it was an invasion of his personal body to be shown like that. And it made me sad, because you just know that he didn't want to be shown with his belly out and slumped over, and it was shocking. But it worked, because they showed the juxtaposition of, one half of the page was Monica with her husband, and the other half was him slumped over. They did that in part of the closing, and it was intense. And the other thing that I was surprised about was when the ME was up, they actually showed a picture of Fabio's heart after it was removed, and how deep the wound was. And that was also displayed on television. And that was shocking to me. But he was a large man, and for them to pierce his heart like that, that took such a deep, hard thrust. That seemed so hateful to me that it shocked me in a certain way, of the intensity of the pressure of that. So, and then just, I got in trouble a few times because I laughed out loud, because some stuff was funny, and I would go, huh, and the judge would look at me. One time Marty and I were there together, and we said something, and one of the detectives turned around and went, shh, like that. And Marty's like, I stopped sitting near him, because he's like such a good boy. He was a little.
And Marty is your husband. For those people who have no idea who.
Yeah, Mona's Mister when he's online, but he's working at the studio right now. But that, what else was notable? talking.
Did they tell you the size of, did the medical examiner talk about the likely size of the blades? Because I heard, what is his name? The defendant who testified. Yeah, and he had described buying a, knife, a fold knife, and it didn't sound like it had a long blade, and the police didn't ask him about it. And I wondered if at trial they talked about, from the depth of the wounds, what the size of the blade had to be.
The dispute between the two killers was that there were two knives, not one.
Right.
And that one was a much larger size that was brandished in Vegas that summer before. But then they just kept, Levine, the defense attorney, he kept going, one knife, two knife, like for days. It was like, find another thing to repeat yourself about, please.
Oh, it's hard to think you can have two defendants and one knife.
Right, but they were stuck, no pun intended, they were stuck on that point for a while to try to show one is being honest and one isn't, maybe it's just so sad there were no defensive wounds. It just shows you that Austin was, in my opinion, was telling the truth, how they knew where to find him, they held him down. And I do believe that Austin covered his eyes the whole time. I do believe he was like, I couldn't look. And because he didn't make a lot of things up. He did give them things about Monica, but he didn't know her name until after everything.
Which only gets back to Judy's question, a while ago. Why? How did he get himself involved in it? What impelled him to participate? It's really hard to explain.
Yeah.
It's perplexing beyond anything. That's why I was being suspicious and going, either Baker has something over his father, or he groomed him as a young man with early sex or something with this group of women and things that were happening, and almost like a P. Diddy thing, like exposing young teens. Hey, look at this party, and it's so confusing. And then you become groomed and ingratiated somehow, where you're like part of it.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. The other, that he had something over his father, sounds less reasonable, because his testimony is that when he didn't want to go forward, that Robert had said, "That's okay, don't worry about it," even though he then talked him into doing it.
True, and good point. And they both were like, okay. They didn't dispute that part.
Right.
So that's true.
That doesn't sound as though he was, extorting him or doing anything.
Yeah, let's go for the grooming part.
Yeah, that's what I said. That one resonates more with me as an expert.
Well, didn't Chris act in those adult videos along with Robert? Or at least he was in the industry.
I'm not aware of that. If he was, that escaped me. I don't know, but that would be horrible, because he's a lot younger than he is.
Yeah. So that would be kind of gross, like maybe he was like 18 and then Robert told him about some job opportunities or something. Because I was just cramming today to learn more about the case today. So I'm pretty sure I heard it somewhere on YouTube on one of those like summary videos. Yeah.
I'm not aware. That's interesting.
Yeah. Okay, but Mona, can you answer this question? Were the girls there for all those parts?
When they testified, they came in and they left, but the last day so they were there for the verdict day, and I wasn't there. I don't recall them being there during the closing, which they'd have to sit through that. I don't. And they were very gentle, both sides, with the younger daughter.
Well, if they were dressed, do you know when when in the sequence was did the sister testify, before or after the daughters? Do you recall?
After.
She testified after?
Yes, and because she was for the defense and the other ones were called, one was called during the prosecution and maybe one at the end of the prosecution. I might be screwing that up, but if they
Okay.
weren't there for the opening or the closing, I don't believe they had to be subjected to that, although I'm sure they're well aware of a lot of it. They didn't, they were there for the verdict, but I didn't see them other
And
times.
I guess I wasn't thinking. I was thinking they were all defense witnesses, and then had they testified before, they wouldn't have, they could have come in, but if they testified after, they couldn't, because they wouldn't have been able to sit in until at least after they testified, if at all.
Right, I
But
don't
they were
think
prosecution witnesses, so that answers that.
right. When I was there, I did not see them after their testimony on the times that I was there. So I don't.
Which is also interesting. I mean, family members who are really supportive tend to sit through the trial, or at least the trial when they're permitted to sit. They're testifying. They can't sit there until after the testimony. I mean, recall in Charlie Adelson's trial, all the comments about Donna and Harvey not being there, not being there for the trial. Family members usually, are there. That's
I wonder if
interesting.
they were there on Zoom, because you can do that. I found out recently because I wanted to watch a sentencing that took place in a trial in Vermont that I had watched, that was finished in December and just finally sentenced this man. And I was going, how do I find this? Because nobody's interested in that trial. And then I called the clerk and she's like, well, you called the wrong number, but you could have been on Zoom. You could come to the hearing.
Yeah, but this doesn't respond to the reason why they're typically there. They're typically there to demonstrate support and to show the world that they support. That's a part of it. And Zoom wouldn't respond to that. It would allow them to see what was going on, but usually you expect them to be there to be sort of moral support in the courtroom. Now, lots of parents would tell their daughters, don't be here. It's too stressful, but she doesn't strike me as someone who would be the kind of parent who would say it's stressful, stay away.
Right. And I think I think Judy might agree with me that Harvey and Donna are just cowardly and were just out for themselves. Everybody's so selfish in that family. Nobody supported Charlie, and Harvey just went to one hearing, and
that was a surprise. Yeah, I didn't expect Harvey to be there.
Yeah, but I thought, Judy, wasn't there some information that Charlie had told Donna and Harvey not to attend the trial? Thought I had seen that in a couple of places.
Oh,
you didn't? You're more likely to.
I don't recall anything about that. Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody should rely on you more than what I remember seeing.
Was it from a jail call?
Was it what?
Oh, did you hear that from a jail call or some other?
No, I just heard a couple of, who could it have been? I'm sure I heard it, but I can't tell you how reliable the source was now, because I don't remember from whom it was I heard it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so do you guys know the answer? Were the murderers into drugs?
I don't think so. I think they drank sometimes, but some people said Baker didn't even really drink, one of his friends. So you can't blame it on substances other than hormones, I guess.
Yeah. And from what little I did hear with those phone calls between Monica and Robert, I was like, geez, these people are just crazy and out of control. It sounded so disgusting.
One of
they talked.
They were, and the letters. Did you see the artwork and the letters that they
I didn't see the artwork.
they used kites, which are other people that they take their ID so they can communicate through letters and phone calls. And one thing that shocked me in this trial, and I don't understand how this attorney could get away with it, an attorney that Baker knew allowed Monica and Baker to call into his phone and set up a three-way call, and then he would exit so they could talk to each other. And they might have had other people's in jail's identities, but that is verified, and I can't understand how they couldn't be at least have a licensure issue after doing
Yeah, that's horrible. Yeah, you would think a bar would do something.
Oh, do you know that nothing's happening?
I don't know that. That's a good point. But I think it would have been brought out by
well, if it's a bar complaint, those are typically confidential unless and until there's an unfavorable decision. So if it's going that way, I don't know that we would know. Isn't that right, Judy? You wouldn't know that unless the person who filed the complaint goes public with it. You wouldn't know.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a good point. I'll try to remember. I'll find out what his name is and then look up the bar. And it must be in California, I would think, because that's where they were.
Yeah.
So it would be pretty easy
to
look up.
Mhm.
But it's a network where doctors and attorneys, and in my opinion, in California, don't get outed. That they're protected by these agencies that they're part of.
Yeah. Well, what about this? Do you know if the sentencing of Christopher Austin is going to be public?
I don't know why it wouldn't be. Like I said, I'll see if they're gonna have it on that. I watched it on Trial TV Live. There weren't that many people that were showing it, and I do believe Law and Crime also showed it. And then probably because they covered it afterwards, I would think Court TV would at least show it after the fact. I do know somebody that's going to go there, but I don't think I can do that Tuesday. I'd have to break plans with someone.
Sentencing is part of the criminal trial. So to the extent there's a public right and the state permits cameras, there wouldn't be any reason. But you have to find somebody who's going to stream it.
Right.
And then maybe it's just not interesting enough to anybody to go in to stream a sentencing hearing on somebody who didn't have a public trial because he pled. And you said even the part of it that should have gotten some attention, which is this famous hairstylist who's involved in beauty, whatever you would call it, didn't get much attention. And so maybe that the streaming services that could cover it just don't think there's enough interest to do it.
There were probably just more popular trials for the, busier YouTube channels to cover it. But Law and Crime did have it, and Trial TV Live showed it. But I mean, after it kept going on for 44 days of trial, it wasn't going to get. And the way they showed none of the hearings and none of the courtroom, it was just really bad video and audio. So I do think they will show it, and it's not the 30th it was supposed to be. It's now the 6th. Oh, that's cool. So Vinny cover it.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it can't be the 30th because it's the 2nd now. So as I understand the way time works, even crediting Einstein, we can't go back.
Yeah. Getting back to coverage, that's why I feel like we're so lucky that channels such as Deep Dive True Crime and now Surviving the Survivor have been live streaming all these Adelson hearings, because if they didn't do it, then we wouldn't be able to see it. Because even though it's supposedly public, if there's no media that's willing to go out there or do whatever needs to be done to stream it, then nobody knows. So
That's
Yeah.
true. And I did get to see Mentor Lawyer show that whole trial the other day, and I was like all excited. Oh, did you see this or that?
Oh, which trial?
The hearing, Donna's
Oh, the
latest
hearing.
hearing, it was on Zoom. I'm like, oh yay, because I missed it because I was doing something, and then it was shown in its entirety later, and I caught it. But
Yeah.
what I found out is that if you get a hold of the courtroom, you can be a public viewer online at these hearings. So if somebody has the time, they could call the clerk and request to be in the hearing, because especially if you're out of state or out of town, how can you be a public member? You can't fly there or drive there.
Mhm.
That would be, I guess you could do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I do have to wrap things up. I've been like sweating like crazy under the lights here, but for some reason, I still look so dark despite having these lights and stuff. It gets kind of hot here.
You have
But
to have some on the sides too, Judy,
I
and go
know,
to Sephora and get the right makeup.
yeah,
And paint
yeah.
the wall white that will, or isn't it white that reflects light, or would you want to reflect or not? Now I don't even know which way you
I
want to
have a
go.
big giant halo light here
Yeah,
that
that's
I
right.
figured out after that one beat red sweaty one.
Yeah, I'll just have to experiment with
Yeah.
different lightings. Yeah, but yeah, ending with the Adelson case though, I mean, there was definitely more evidence against Monica, especially with Chris directly testifying against her, but I still feel pretty optimistic that something is going to happen against Wendi, especially since Tim Jansen has changed his tune. And I don't know who he talked to or who his source is,
Yeah,
but
I
he,
don't
he
know that,
said something.
I don't think a source in the prosecutor's office would directly say anything to him. I would be really surprised. But I think it's possible to gauge a different feeling coming out of them when the question comes up, and that's maybe what he, picked up on. And it was also, I mean, they did that new investigation and they had a wire in February, so there's at least a little more coming out there. And we don't know whether it's simply against Donna or whether it implicates Wendi. And
Yeah.
Youssef, it's got to be something that relates at least in some part to Wendi, one would think, because she was Wendi's friend. And, circumstantial cases, every little bit, contributes. So,
Yeah, that's right. And Monica sure did a bunch of weird behaviors. She had
well, but
the
the one
motive.
thing we know, Judy, is Wendi isn't around sitting in police cars
Yeah,
incriminating
talking.
herself.
Yeah.
Right, so
Unfortunately.
we're hoping some of this old data on maybe Charlie's Google account and whatever they've gotten from Donna and Harvey will implicate her, and some of the witnesses we haven't heard of or heard from yet. And what I was thinking, Prof. Joe, is that I was watching Joel and Tim when Donna was arrested hours
Mhm.
before it was public, and they
Yeah.
didn't have a source. So it's possible they do know people that know more than we're privy to. I hope,
Mhm.
because I believe that she will go down, but I'm just hoping. I just have been in fury with a lot of people watching this case for years and going, seems so obvious to us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think so too, but I've said in part it's because I do believe a prosecutor should not bring a case when they don't have a sincere belief that on the evidence they've got a reasonable chance to prevail, because it's the imposition of the state and it's a terrible thing to do to people if you don't think you've got a chance of getting a conviction. I think it's irresponsible, and they've got an ethical responsibility. But I do think in this case, in Wendi's case, that if you run all the inferences from all the pieces of information we know about, that a prosecutor could conclude that there is enough. And I think a prosecutor would not be likely to do it if there was the chance that other evidence might come later. But in Wendy's case, I don't think that's true. I think any additional evidence you're going to see will come out of Donna's trial. You know, it's not clear that they'll ever prosecute Harvey. And so given that, I think, you know, I've said all along that I think there is enough. And for a couple of other reasons. We can't be sure. Now, Tim is in a better place to know this because he knows the people, and if they're sending vibes about confidence level or anything, he's going to be able to pick it up. I obviously can't. Even if I were there, I don't think I could do it because I don't know them as well as he does. But Georgia at the trials, when she's done direct examination of Wendi, has been careful about what she asks her, and the reason is the immunity that Wendi has. So if there is something more that they have that would add to the evidence against Wendi, and they didn't need it in Charlie's trial, because if they needed it, they would have had to ask the question and get it. Georgia would not ask that question, because once you ask the question and get the answer, the immunity covers, and then you can't use it unless you can find, you know, a different way that you got it. So she's got to be careful what she asks Wendi if she's thinking of prosecuting Wendi. And so she's not asking her anything more than she absolutely needs, in her view, to build a successful case against Charlie. The same thing will be true of Donna. So I've always wondered if there might be a little, might not be a big thing, but a little more that's out there that they can use that we haven't seen and they haven't used because of the immunity. And then if you add to that Sarah Yusof, whatever information is, and this new wire and whatever that may show, although I think that may really go to Donna and be hearsay against Wendi. But so there's just a little bit more that we know is out there than when Charlie's trial happened. And in addition, as I say, I've always wondered whether they might have a little bit more that they're not asking about because of the immunity. And, you know, it's going to be you either do it now or you're never going to do it. So I've always felt that they will go forward. And I still do.
I completely agree with that. And you could tell each trial with Georgia that she was pushing a little hard just to dig at her and not saying things. So my non-lawyer mind agrees with your professorship mind that you're just going, she has more, she can't use it, good for saving it. I just can't believe for the life of me that Kappelman won't finish the job. I believe she will be in the parallel that we were talking about, just like Beth Silverman was sure to get Monica for 8 years, and she did it her way, very thoroughly, very detailed.
That's right. Quick question from White P. Are you planning to go to the sentencing if it is May 6th?
It is May 6th, and I do have plans on Tuesday, but every time I say I'm not going to go, I just jump up and drive downtown. So it's possible, but I do plan on going to Monica's sentencing. And like I said before, it's very odd that it's not popular. It's easy to get in. And from the first time that my husband and I went, everybody in that courtroom knew us, had talked to us, and you're kind of like part of the family once you sit all day like this trying to not get reprimanded.
On that note, I thought it's pretty interesting that Fabio's sister started talking to you. How did that happen?
They sit in the third row and I sit in the second row because the law officers sit in the row right behind the prosecution, and it's a small courtroom. So just my personality is that I'm going to make eye contact and nod, and you're waiting for it to start. You see people in the same bathroom, you see people in the hallway, you wait at the elevators. So I just did something kind of like, I feel for you, something gentle, which opened the doors. And then Morella's husband was there, Marco, for a while. And I talked to him and I talked to her sister, and they were just very forthcoming with information. And you basically listen because they're sitting there day in and day out, and they're so happy to have any support. I just kind of quietly said, I'm rooting for you in so many ways. And then they told me a lot of things. And when we were waiting for the verdict, I asked other things like, what was it like in Canada for your business in the pandemic? And just, other things to not hear all the tragedy. And then they just offer up information. And Beth Silverman walked over to us the first time we were there and said, are you press or are you something? And we just said no. And she was open and talked to us about her life and this case and how long it had been, and just very, very friendly and open people. But I didn't feel emboldened enough to walk into the clerk's desk. And I didn't feel emboldened to speak to some people. But one of the detectives that shushed us, I wanted to know Heather Stagel's name because it was hard to find the second prosecutor's name. And I walked up to him in the hallway and just went, excuse me, detective. And he did not want to talk to me, but I just said, could you tell me the other prosecutor's name that works with Miss Silverman? And he said, something. And I went, could you spell it for me? I was just like, oh, it's my money that's being spent on this trial as somebody that's lived in Los Angeles for decades. And also I had worked for the government, so I know that you have a right to certain information, or I just didn't feel shy about that. So that was kind of fun. And like,
oh, okay. Oh, I think that's so nice of you to kind of be like the personal welcome wagon for Fabio's relatives, because if they flew all the way from Canada and they're in this totally unfamiliar place, then it probably was kind of nice that they sort of got to know you during the trial.
They were very, that's nice of you to say. They were very aware of whenever we or just myself were there. And one day somebody went to Morella, who is she? And she said, a supporter. So I wasn't there for my own YouTube channel or my Facebook page, and I wasn't asking for a lot of attention. So I think they were just happy that there's some public people that are just there energetically, because it did take effort and parking and spending, giving up a day when you go downtown, because even though it's 17 miles in LA, that could be an hour.
Yeah, 2-hour drive or something.
Never know. The last time I was furiously trying to get there for the verdict that I suspected, I had to take 5 different freeways, and I was like, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I do have to run now, but I really appreciate your time. 2 hours just went by so quickly. So thank you so much for being here. And, it's kind of interesting how there are these parallels or sort of similarities with the Adelson Markel case. So, okay. Well, hope you guys enjoy the rest of the weekend then. And hopefully you guys will come on in the future to help me talk. So, or Mona will do more comedy, right? Because it's
Even
easier
the
for me to
naysayers.
talk. And
Even the naysayers, Judy, they're like,
oh,
what's happening
yeah.
here?
Jo, do you do comedy?
I've never tried. I think I may be unintentionally funny to people at times.
Okay, well,
We'll
maybe
do a
if we have a
reading.
reading,
We'll do a reading.
Okay.
yeah, if we have a reading where I think Professor Potuto could fit in well, you know, after all, Steve Cohen played the role of Charlie Adelson when we read the Dolce Vita transcript, so that was pretty funny.
Okay. Well, you do great. I love your lip clip. They're very, very good. Very creative. Very creative.
Yeah, it's just an interesting way to get the info out to people.
Well, it's still very creative. You think of things that, I don't think most of us, it would ever occur to most of us to try to reenact. You do a great job.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
Mona, it was lovely meeting you. And Judy, it was great seeing you again
Okay.
over the
Thank you.
Ethernet or whatever this is called. Right?
Yeah, StreamYard. So, okay.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I'll talk to you
Thanks.
guys later then. Have a
Bye.
great day. Good evening. Bye.
Bye.